March. Great. Thank you all so much for attending this month's community conversation. And I think it was such a great topic about how we should be inclusive and not exclusive. We should everybody should be accepted. So this is Pride Month, and I'm going to turn it over to some wonderful people. Our speakers today is Lauren, Alex, and Miranda. Am I correct? Am I missing somebody?
And Rabbi Kobe.
And Rabbi Kobe. I'm sorry, Rabbi Kobe. Please don't charge it to my heart. So I want to open it up and let's talk about the conversation and really talk about what's going on and what's happening. And so that we can enlighten some people, but also let people know that everybody is included. So I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Kobe first.
I would love if someone else starts. That would be great.
I think Lauren had some really salient points that she wanted to bring up regarding this specifically.
So we had discussed, and so a lot of our, I guess let's start with introductions. I think that'd be great. So I can introduce myself. I am Lauren Carranza. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I identify as a cisgender queer woman, and I am the program director for community support housing at Interfaith Works. So I oversee our team of 10 case managers, and we house 200 people on any given day in our scattered site permanent support housing programs. And I will pass it over to Miranda to introduce herself or their self.
Sure. So my name is Miranda. At Interfaith Works, I'm the Community Engagement and Volunteer Coordinator for our Essential Needs Center. In terms of pronouns, we'll say she, her are good enough for now. And I identify as a very queer person. I'll pass it over to Alex.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Cross. I use they, them pronouns, and I am our fundraising and data support specialist in the development department at Interfaith Works. Behind me, I have trails of unisex bathrooms across university campuses, increased bathroom access, as well as a pride center at my college university. So I am going to continue to pretend to be an expert for tonight's session. And Rabbi, if you'd like to round us out.
Sure. I'm Rabbi Kobe. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Or Hadash in Damascus, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm personally am an ally of people in the LGBTQ community and very strongly support. Our synagogue very strongly supports. And I would say the Reform movement, which is one branch of Judaism, also really strongly supports and stands together and acknowledges that whole idea of inclusivity.
And so I guess kicking it off, some of us were talking, I think when Sam had invited me, I was kind of like, well, what are we going to talk about within Pride? So, and for those who don't know, Pride is the celebration of the LGBTQ community. It is every June. Typically speaking, it's different in different countries and different areas of the United States celebrate Pride in different months, especially for the hot. Coming from Texas, you do not celebrate Pride in June. You probably do in the spring where the temperatures are a little bit lower. I think Pride should be all the time. So I think that Alex and Miranda we spoke kind of just trying to figure out like, where would we even start? And so we had some different things from kind of personal experiences that we were comfortable sharing to as queer identifying people or just as people in general. And then also too, just talking a lot, I think, about just the joy in the queer community. I think that a lot of times, folks will other people or that because you're in a marginalized group, that doesn't mean that you don't have joy or pride. And so to really refocus some of that dialogue and narrative about joy and just expressing and being who you are. So I think, I'm trying to think of where to even start, but I think the biggest thing is I say that being a part of the community is not linear. Everyone has their own journey and story. I should also say my credentials. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So a LA LGBTQ Center certified RISE trainer. So I have been training for the last 5 years for folks who work with youth in foster care who identify as LGBTQ and on the best practices with that. So quick facts, I guess I'll throw out there is I will say 23% of foster care youth identify as LGBTQ. We know there's an overrepresentation of youth, and that also 80% of those identify as people of color. So I think a lot of conversations, particularly in the queer community, because it's such an inclusive group, also talks about the intersectionality. So intersectionality of gender expression, of race, of class, all of those parts of yourself that might be more publicly identifiable also factor into your experience as a queer person. And I think just maybe on a sad note, and I do want us to end on the joy note that we had all talked about, but I do think it's important to talk about just recent things that have been happening in our community. And I was really sad. So I'm a member of the Silver Spring community. I've lived in this community for over 12 years. And actually Sam, Miranda, Alex, and I were all tabling on Sunday at the Pride at the Plaza event in downtown Silver Spring. And there was someone, I don't know what they were saying, but they were not support. And Rabbi was also there as well. And we got to meet. So, you know, there are still very much acts of aggression against the community, especially at joyous events like Pride in the Plaza, where there was a lot of young people and there was somebody on a megaphone for several hours spewing hate and rejection of who we are at an event that was intentionally meant to be a celebration. And then even last evening, so that was also in Silver Spring. I think this one I'm still processing myself, but there was an incident of 8 to 9 pride and trans flag burnings in Silver Spring neighborhoods, where people actually went onto people's properties and lit pride and trans flags and a Ukrainian flag on fire. And to see that happening in our community, which, you know, most folks in the DMV area would consider this a progressive area, is concerning. And in light of the national trend too, just last year, over 500 different national bills at state, local levels were passed against the LGBTQ community, and half of those were against the trans community. So I think just in light of that, there is a ton of strength and joy and resiliency, but it also seems to be a chapter where there needs to be added support and love and caringness for the LGBTQ community, because things are still happening. And just in our backyard, that neighborhood where the flags happen is literally a mile from my house. I drive by those streets, and that's really, really scary. And I've had pride flags on my own property, and I'm like, are they going to get burned? So. But yeah, I will pass that over whoever kind of wants to take it from there. So on that not so great note.
I'm happy to continue on if Rabbi and Alex, you're all right with that. Perfect. So unfortunately, I also need to start this with some tragedy that hits close to home for me. I think for those of you who don't know, I am a Canadian citizen, and yesterday, the university that I graduated from in Waterloo, Ontario, there was someone went into a gender studies classroom, asked what the name of the class was, and then stabbed the professor and 2 of the students.
Wow.
Thankfully, like, no one has died from this, but you know, for me, it's often very easy to kind of feel complacent about things, kind of like what Lauren was saying. And so this has been a very painful personal reminder that even places that we think would be safe and should be safe aren't always that way. And that it's important for all of us, those of us in the community, and I think especially allies of our community, to be ready to step up and show support. I wanted to focus kind of what I was talking about a little bit more on queer joy, partially like not just because of what's happened at my university, but also just when these, like, anything like that happens and things that we've seen over the past year and even earlier than that, like, I keep myself sane by finding moments of joy and ways to be happy. And so, as Lauren said, IW was tabling at Pride in the Plaza in Silver Spring on Sunday. And as Lauren said, it was like not even 10 feet, probably less than that, from our table, where different groups of homophobic Christians decided that that's where they were going to stand and start shouting really awful things into a megaphone. And, you know, at first we had tried really hard to just ignore what people, you know, the messages that people were saying. we had been told by the event organizers that like if something like that happened, here are the people who you can go and talk to, and they will find a way to deal with it. And so we had done that. There were people who were trying to like physically block them off, but still, like just being there and hearing that like my existence is an abomination for several hours was extremely distressing. You know, it's like you can do as much as you can to try to ignore it, but it's just like it just keeps digging into you and just reminds you of all of these other times that you've heard these kinds of things. I need to give a huge shout out to Alex, because after I took some space, I ate some pupusas, I came back and those groups were still at it. We had somehow ended up with a bunch of umbrellas at our table, and Alex very kindly but very firmly said, like, go join the people who are holding up umbrellas and blocking off these groups from the rest of the Pride event. I was honestly really afraid to do that because, again, it's just like you hear this stuff and it's, as much as you want to ignore it, it's hard for it not to settle in. But I went, I joined. I'm very grateful to everyone else who was tabling at that point. That would have been Alex, Sam, and Terry Blandon, who is our director of development. We all, at one point or another, came out and joined the people holding umbrellas. It was very surreal, I will say, just like hearing all of this stuff in the background and trying to ignore it, and then being so close to their speakers that you couldn't really understand the words that they were saying. But eventually people from the Pride event brought in speakers and we were playing very loud, very joyous music, and it just turned into like a dance party. And, you know, it was genuinely one of the most joyous moments that I've had in a really long time. I will say it was also like, I don't know, I felt vulnerable in ways that I think I'm also still processing. Just something like there were a lot of people taking pictures and taking videos, and it wasn't always clear what their intentions were with that. Like there were people who like very clearly on the side of the Pride event saying like, is it okay if we take some pictures? And that was fine. But like you'd also see people just kind of walking around like lazily holding a phone and filming, and like, what are you doing with that? Like, how is, you know, I'm proud of who I am, but that doesn't mean that I want my picture going to people who are going to try to target me. I think I will say that, you know, not being the only one who was standing up against them was very important, and having so many other people who were also committed to that. And like, you know, even if they weren't joining us, like people were going around with water bottles. Alex got earplugs and was passing them out to anybody who needed them. Like just moments like that of like really feeling support from the community and just from other people was really, really great. I don't want to talk too much more because I know we still have two really wonderful presenters, and I'm sure there's other comments and questions that folks who are now starting to join in will have. So I will thank you all for listening. I'm not really an expert. I'm just a bit of a glutton for attention, which is why I've ended up doing this. So I will pass it off either to Rabbi Kobe or Alex, whoever is feeling the most inspired to speak right now.
I'm happy to go, Alex, unless you want to go next.
I will leave it in your capable hands.
Okay.
Before
I
you
mean, you're marrying our beloved Sam Taylor. You must be very capable.
I'm officiating, just to clarify, he's marrying somebody else, but it is my honor that I am officiating at his wedding for sure. But I do want to clarify, I'm not marrying him. Courtney would be, I think, very upset. In any case, I want to talk a little bit also about those haters that were there, but I want to flip it on its end, because I think it was a gross misunderstanding of the Bible, and I think it was a gross misunderstanding of text. And I think it's important that we clarify that they don't get the voice on what text means. And I very much think they misinterpreted it. And they misinterpret the Bible. And I know some people will hear that and say, oh no, but one of the cool things about Judaism is that there's a lot of ways to interpret and experience text. And so for starters, I think that God in Hebrew is a plural word many a times. And so God actually is non-binary if we want to use modern language. And also the first human was non-binary as well, and really used they, them. And the Hebrew supports that. The haters that were there were talking about Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, which annoys the daylights out of me, just so we're clear. But in Hebrew, which is where the text, of course, originates, it's Adam, and Adam just means human. And so that's kind of the starting ground, is Adam is human, and that human was non-binary, or both genders, or however you want to understand the diversity of gender and the spectrum of gender. Adam really is all of those people into one human. And so Adam does not mean Adam, it means human, and we're all part of that. So I just want to clarify from the Bible. And then as we move over in Judaism, there's a body of text called the Talmud, which is from approximately, depending which biblical scholar you look at, but it's approximately like 300 BCE, before the Common Era, to about 500 CE, so Common Era. So again, a very ancient text. That's how we first interpret the Bible. And even in the Talmud, so in those years, starting in, again, 300 BCE to around 500 CE, the rabbis actually talk about 8 different genders. So they don't just talk about male and female. It goes all the way back to that, where there's this acknowledgement that while a lot of people are male or female, not everyone is. And the rabbis recognize these 8 genders without judgment, without prejudice, just as an acknowledgement of, here's a whole diversity of people. And we need to then, for the rabbis, they want to understand the different laws and how it relates to all of these 8 genders. But they don't live in a binary world. They don't live in a world where there are only 2 genders. And they historically recognize that sense of diversity and that sense of openness to multiple genders. And I think that's really amazing, that our tradition from the start is really very open and very welcoming and very supportive, that gender is a spectrum, and wherever we land on that spectrum, it's okay. And it's meant to be without judgment, and it's meant to celebrate who we are. So I can go into more detail, but I know I want to make sure Alex has time, and I want to make sure there's time for questions. So I'll pass it over to you, Alex.
Thanks. I could listen to you talk about the Talmud for at least a couple more hours, but I do want to respect that. Not everyone has that time in their afternoon. So I think I want to circle back to the experience that we had at Pride and talk about the joy that actually came with that, despite it being, a gut-wrenching experience. There is so much joy in solidarity, and there's joy in acting in solidarity, and there's joy in receiving that solidarity. It was probably one of the most moving experiences that I've had, to see an interfaith coalition of clergy members actively go up to those who are protesting Pride and engage in dialogue, and to engage in that kind of nonviolent confrontation. And so that was a beautiful act of solidarity that, 1, was not expected, but 2, was rallied within 30 seconds. And going to what Miranda had mentioned, the solidarity of acting with and protecting the rest of your community is an incredibly joyous and healing experience. And although it does sometimes come from fear, it is a part of what makes us a stronger community. And the fact that we were all able to continue to wear our Interfaith Works clothes and not have to run into the H&M across the street and buy a different shirt, was another act of solidarity that I know that, at least for Lauren, Miranda, and I, as we spoke in our previous conversations, is not a solidarity that we've experienced in other workplaces. So to have that standing behind us, and to know that there are pictures of Terry and Miranda singing 80s songs in their IW gear, standing in solidarity, is one of the most lighthearted and joyous feelings that I have had in a long time. And I also want to and I am a sociologist by trade and I study white supremacy. So there's also joy in seeing these protesters, because that means we've made progress. There is always a lashback when minority groups make progress and make big steps towards recognition. Less than 20 years ago, less than how old my sister is. My sister is 23. She has always lived in a life, always lived in a world in her consciousness with same-sex marriage. When she was an infant, up to 5, people were saying, it's okay if you get married, but don't put that in my face. It's okay if, and that if was a blanket form of homophobia and transphobia in a way that didn't always present itself as such. And so it was within 20 years, we've gone from openly hostility towards the idea of same-sex marriage to a world where my sister never had it in her mind that I wouldn't be married. You can all tell my partner I said that. I am waiting on a ring, no worries. And I know it's incredibly difficult to see hateful comments and to hear them and to, look and see 3 different religious groups protesting your existence, but they wouldn't be there if we weren't existing so beautifully and proudly and in such solidarity with our allies, with ourselves, and within ourselves. So optimism is not the best word, right? Because it's hard to be optimistic in that situation, but it's important to remember that we are making progress and they're here because we have made progress. And we're not going to stop making progress just because they're there.
Say that, first of all, I love you all. Anyway, but the other part of it is that God loves you too. God created us all. And so for those individuals who are small-minded, then they have a lot of learning to do, but they also got to answer to him or to her. And so at the end of the day, I think that the idea, one, that, like you said, you could wear your Interfaith Works shirt and still stand. And the fact that we stand together, regardless of whoever it is. And it's not like, and one of the things I was texting, chatting with Alex, and I said it hurt my heart that I wasn't able to be there, but the other part, because I'd stand, I'm a militant. But the other part of it is that the idea that you all stood together and that people stood together. I think it is important that there is no exclusivity in the world of God. Those people are the ones who that's man-made. Because at the end of the day, we all belong to him or her. And so I just wanted you to know that, and that's a Roz thing. I'm just gonna say that from myself. But I just wanted you to know that there are people who still stand as a preacher, and I'm an AME preacher, and as I stand as a speaker for God, I know that he loves us all. And so when for the ones that are out there with the small minds, it's their loss. It's their loss. But I also wanted to open it up. I'm sorry, I had my tangent. I'm sorry, y'all. So I want you to put your questions in the chat if you have questions. Or you can unmic yourself, unmute yourself if you want to comment, but only positive. If you're going to be negative, this is not the forum for you. Okay? And we will take you out the box. So I'm just going to be very honest with that. That's not what we do. So it's only positive. So I'm going to be quiet so people. Hi, Frank.
So we have one question in the chat already. Frank, you had unmuted yourself. Did you also have a question? Now you're on mute and I can't hear you.
I do. Can I go ahead and ask?
Sure, and then we'll circle back to Mike's question in the chat.
Sure. Well, first of all, I got a great deal of respect for each and every one of you. And I really appreciate, I wanted to be part of this this opportunity, this community conversation, because I think it's important, number one. And, you know, I don't think there's any other better way to validate concerns and to show that support by unless you're part of the conversation. So at least just from my perspective as a board member for IW. One of the questions that I had was when it comes to some of the services that IW provides, including, you know, emergency and supportive housing. Do you all feel that the services are being offered equally? And do you feel that there's anything that IW can do to improve, you know, their efficiency regarding how they offer those services with respect to the LGBTQ community?
Sure, this is a great Lauren question. I know that she came prepared to discuss this and she's leaving. So whatever she says is, you know, free reign.
I had a feeling that that was going to come to me. So being in the homeless services area of Interfaith Works, I can say that, oh, and Frank, I think you're still a little unmuted. I can hear some background noise there. Thank you. So we house folks regardless of what your orientation is. Or your orientation or your gender expression. So I actually really love maybe within the last year, we opened a new shelter. And it was interesting just how I even have to change my own mind or my own framework in which I view things, even as a member of the community. And it's an all gender shelter. And I remember when we first opened, I was like, oh, it's co-ed. But then I was like, Lauren, that's very limited because then you're not including folks that are non-binary. So even having to undo some of that. So we do have 2 all gender shelters. We also have 2 women specific shelters. But if you identify as a transgender woman or you're more comfortable in a woman presenting shelter, then you have the option to stay there. That is the regulations and the rules in Montgomery County. And IW, and I can speak for the other program directors, wholeheartedly believe in that. From a supportive housing lens, it's pretty easy just to exist. It's all your own apartment. So you can just totally be whoever you are. It's interesting that the county and homeless services in one way has caught up to the fact that there are people who identify gender differently. So for all of the forms for folks who are entering any kind of crisis homeless services, there is an option to identify as either not identify at all or male, female, transgender. So we have some of that information, and a new initiative that the county is doing too is asking a question if folks identify as LGBTQ in general, just to kind of try to collect the data. Now, I have my own feelings about asking a stranger who's coming to seek emergency shelter if you identify as part of the community. I think that's where more training needs to come in. But from a services perspective, I would say that you have equal access to things regardless of how you identify. I think that being said, that's one piece of it, right? That's the services you receive, but I want to talk too about the people you're interacting with, right? So who are your case managers? Who are the people that are directly working with you? And so one of the things, so I think I'll go back to kind of my own experience and then talk about my experience with IW. So my very first job out of undergrad, I worked in a nonprofit. I will not say the nonprofit's name, since changed leadership. But I did not know that majority of my coworkers were evangelical Christians who were not affirming of LGBTQ folks. And for perspective, this was before marriage equality. I didn't think marriage equality was going to happen at that point. This was 2009. And I came out within a couple of months, and I had a terrible experience for the next 3 years that I worked there. My supervisor directly told me that she was praying to God that I would find a boyfriend. And I was invited to their churches, and I never got asked about my girlfriend at the time, versus every single person got asked about their husband or their boyfriend. It was an all-female staff agency at that time. So that was very much my experience. So I think it's interesting if you ask a lot of folks who identify in the community about their experiences with religion, a lot of folks are conflicted. I think things are definitely changing. I think that was one of my moments too from Saturday, as I saw folks with, I don't even know what the name of it is, like the little collars, and they were surrounding the haters. And I was like, I had never seen that, like actual like ministers like actually protesting in that way. And I think growing up in the Catholic faith, that was never my experience. It's cool, you can be gay, but just don't act on being gay, right? And that was the narrative that I grew up with. And then coming out as a young 22-year-old and being told by a supervisor she's praying for me to find a boyfriend, you're just kind of reaffirming the narratives. So I think in light of that, transitioning it back to IW and the services we provide, I'm happy to say that I've had a great experience at IW. I came out right away. This is who I am. I have a wife. I'm a member of the community. I'm out and proud. I do not try to hide it. And I have had a great experience at IW. But I do think that I'm very intentional as a supervisor when I hire folks. So I have had some folks that they are no longer with the agency, but there was some bias that was found, and in addition to some other concerns, and they were no longer deemed a good fit for the company, we let them go. So one of the things that I do when I am screening people to be case managers or joining our team is I ask them about diversity, and I ask them specific questions about gay and transgender. Now, if I'm interviewing you and you have trouble saying the word gay or transgender, I usually am a little worried about whether you're going to be comfortable serving our clients that identify within that community. And I don't want anybody who has any kind of bias, whether it be race, religion, what country you originated or you came from. I don't want anybody like that working with our clients. They've had too many hardships, they're too vulnerable, and they don't deserve it. That's not treating people with dignity or respect. So I think we, as an agency, try really hard to make sure that the people that are serving our clients are equally informed. And I know we have done different trainings. I know Christine, before she left, has been begging me for years to do the RISE training at IW, which is something I promise I will do before the calendar year ends. But yeah, so I think to your question, it's easy and scattered site. I think our shelters are set up to be that way. I think where the real struggles can be with some of our clients is the other clients. So if you're in a congregate setting, you're open to everyone and their opinions. And oftentimes you don't have another place to go. And I think that's where we really try to train our staff to intervene in situations where someone is being emotionally or psychologically harmed. And to try to intervene in those situations, or even to room selections for the shelters that have more smaller settings. We generally try to put younger people with younger people, older people with older people. So there's some ways that we can try to make things more comfortable while still trying to serve everyone. So.
Great. So Mike's question in the chat is, how can we support members of the LGBTQ community? And I think that Miranda and Lauren and I have talked a lot, so I want to throw it to Rabbi Colby and see if you had a beginning or incomplete answer to Mike's question, which is an answer that is incomplete always, of course.
Exactly. I have an answer. It is definitely not a complete answer because I do think it's ongoing. I think that we need to be upstanders and not bystanders. So if we kind of do nothing, that's almost as horrible as doing evil. And especially in today's political climate where there are so many haters, I think for me as an ally, it is my job and my obligation to make sure that I am standing right beside people who are LGBTQ and affirming them and their identities and making sure that their needs are met. So to me, it's asking those questions. It's standing up at Board of Education when they're trying to ban books, because God forbid you read a book on something that may or may not be who you are. And so it's to stand up and say all books should be taught, right? We should learn about everybody's stories and we should hear people's stories. And some of it is the one-on-one. I think that's a way of getting rid of prejudice and hate, is when you actually meet people. And it's not just statistical numbers of whatever form. So to me, it is trying to have dialogue, even with haters, but it's also trying to make sure that we just stand and support and actively stand, right? So it may be books, it may be other legislation that comes through. Obviously, Montgomery County is pretty liberal, but we know around the country, there's so much hate going on and so many anti-LGBTQ laws. And it is our job to, obviously I don't live in Florida or Texas or red states, but it's still my job to say to those senators, what you're doing is wrong and horrible. And so we need to be reaching out to Congress as well, whether they're our own to say thank you, or others to say, no, what you're doing is inexcusable. So those are some angles that we can all get involved and do more.
I think if I could add something to that, which I mean was incredible. So please, forgive my my brashness.
Please go ahead.
But I think that as a queer person, kind of as you were saying, like I feel supported through people's actions. I think it is also important to remember that just because we live in a place like Montgomery County doesn't mean that those kinds of bigoted attitudes don't exist. I mean, not including what we all experienced on Sunday. Since moving to Montgomery County, I've had the experience of trying to come out to someone at a work setting. And even if they didn't say, like, I don't think queer people exist, or like, you're going to hell because you're gay, like the response was still extremely rude and dismissive. And it was part of the challenge was like, it was in a setting where I really didn't expect that to happen. But like, it also meant that the next time that I wanted to have that conversation with someone else in that, like, with someone else on that team, that it was just that much harder. I also think for people who want to be allies of the community, I think part of it has to include being prepared for yourself to be uncomfortable. I mean, just even thinking about on Sunday, like, hearing that kind of rhetoric hits different for straight people than it does for queer people. And like, it's still, I'm sure, is very distressing for straight people to hear those kinds of things. I know back when I thought I was straight, it was really miserable hearing those kinds of things, but like, it's different when it's rhetoric that's targeted at your existence. I think everybody, like just statistically, like everybody knows at least one person who is a part of the community, even if they haven't made that known to you. And so I think I would just say that, like, through your actions, the things that you do and the things that you say, like, make it known that you are a safe and supportive space for people. And you will, I mean, just like, once you do that, people will feel comfortable going to you for support. And really, like, that's just what we need right now, is like, we need that solidarity. We need that support. We need to know that, I mean, just like, honestly, Rosalind, you saying as a clergy member that, like, God made me who I am, and that is beautiful and great. Like, that made me very emotional. So like, those kinds of moments are so important, like, regardless of the context in which they're happening.
Yeah, and I want to add on to Miranda's comments and continue to answer Mike's unanswerable question. Is children understand gender at 3 years old? It is scientifically shown that children understand gender at 3 years old. People understand their sexuality at around 5th, 6th grade, or they're starting to question it at that point. As well as, older science says that 1 in 10 people are gay. And this is a great saying that I've seen in the pro-choice movement that I want to bring into this space as well. If you don't know a queer person, it's because you're not a safe person to them. And that is an internal conversation that you need to have with yourself to be an ally. And how do you stand in that space? And how do you stand in that realization that it is me who is the problem? I don't think my sister knows more straight people than queer people at 23. It is the space that you intentionally create. But there's also different ways you can show up as an ally. Sometimes that is guarding the closet door and standing and protecting someone who's either A, not ready to come out, still questioning, or it is unsafe for them to come out. On an individual level, that is just as important as advocately, like, standing and, buying a friend a rainbow flag and a cake when they come out. Also wonderful. And I think on a more macro level, look at the policies that you're engaged with every day. In your workspaces, does everyone have access to a safe bathroom that doesn't single them out? Can they go to the bathroom just like everybody else and not have to go, if you're in a school, all the way to a nurse's room, or if you're at work, all the way to the end of the hall? What for IW, we just are relooking at our client services restrictions guide. Those are the bad words for it, but and making sure that the queer community is included in those, making sure that we are standing in queer spaces and we're looking at that both authentically. Who are we engaging with? When are we engaging with them? And do both of those things go hand in hand? Or are we talking to, an unsafe space one day, but then trying to create a safe space the next day? Those are all questions that we as individuals in a work setting need to look at, as well as supervisors as well. If you are a supervisor, making sure that people who work under you know that you're a safe person. Is that putting a rainbow sticker on your door? Is that introducing yourself with your pronouns first? We know that the trickle-down effect, the trickle-down economics does not work, but trickle-down bigotry does. So if you as a supervisor are not actively standing in that space, your staff is not going to follow you. And then on an even greater level, following up on what Rabbi Kobe said, engaging in your local politics, engaging in your school board, and so on. You don't have kids in the school system? That's okay. Those children are going to be citizens of the world that you're living in. And you have an investment in making sure that their future is as brilliant as it can be. And on a greater level, everybody go vote. Obviously, like if you're not registered to vote, register to vote. If you can't vote, like some people who are Canadian citizens in this group, make sure you're talking to your friends who can vote and ensuring that they go to the polls instead. And it is, support comes in incredibly many detailed different levels. If you saw Shrek when it came out, allyship is like a parfait or an onion. It has layers, and it's important that we engage in all of them. And it's important that the community engages in all of those layers for other members as well. We've seen our trans siblings being, just run through the ringer in this past pandemic time. And we and the community need to stand up for them. And so it's never just, allyship is never just someone from the outside of the community going in. It's going in and in and in and in and in until a rising tide raises all boats and we're all able to live in that brilliant future that we want.
Like, I don't know how I'm going to go after that, Alex. I wholeheartedly agree with our three other folks. I think taking a step back, I might take a step even further back of what do you mean like support? Like, right? Support can look really different to different people. So I think I want to talk just about the individuality of the experience too. I also want to bring up passing privilege a little bit too, because I feel like sometimes we don't talk about that as much. And that's definitely something very, very relevant. And yeah, so I think just as far as support, I think if I'm doing if we're doing our training, one of the things we do is like what to say when someone comes out to you and what not to say, right? It's like really basic. And so like, someone shares that about you. Thank you so much for trusting me with that. Thank you for sharing. And it's interesting one of the things when I was actually learning how to facilitate this training is like, oh, you're so brave. Thanks for sharing that. Even those words, while they might be well-intentioned, can indicate that there's something wrong with being gay, right? Like, oh, you're brave for being this, right? So I think just going simple with things, that just being, thank you for sharing that with me. I love you, and call it a day. And I think the biggest thing is, if you don't know how to support, ask how you can support. Just like you would a friend who's sick, like, hey, how can I show up for you? Can I give you a meal? Like, do you need a hug? Like, can I get you something? I think it's the same exact way within the LGBTQ community. What do you need? I think the biggest thing is also not making assumptions. We share this a lot in the training, is don't don't assume anybody's gay, right? Like, and I think even within the community, you can be totally guilty of this. I definitely have some family members like, oh yeah, you know, I'm just waiting for them to come out, right? But I shouldn't make any assumptions about anybody. I should wait for them to feel uncomfortable in their own time. And I think what Alex really said is very accurate. If you don't know anybody who's in the community, are you a safe person for the community? There's a lot to be said about who you share parts of your life with, just in any aspect of who you are, right? I think being in the community is very interesting if you've got passing privilege. So passing privilege, for example, for me, a lot of people don't know that I am queer and I have a wife. I present as more feminine. So folks usually just think, and I've gotten misgendered a lot of times. A good example is I was in court at my previous job, and I said I was unavailable because I was going on my honeymoon. And when the county attorney said, oh, you know, oh, you and your husband, right? In that moment, I got misidentified, and I was in a public setting. I was like, do I correct this? You know, no, it's my wife. But I didn't feel safe in that moment to be true to who I was. And that had complicated feelings too, because I didn't feel safe in that setting to do that. So there's very much about passing privilege too, that some don't make assumptions that someone is or isn't gay. I get really frustrated when I show up at a bar and they just think I'm the straight girl with the gay guys. I'm like, no, I'm part of your community too. And I think that speaks a lot to safety. I think we see that a lot, particularly we know, I think this is I'm going to misquote the statistic, but I'm pretty sure I'm 80% accurate on this. Black trans women have the mortality rate that usually have died by the time they're 45. I mean, that's absolutely horrific. The amount of violence against the Black transgender woman community. I mean, so, and we know that some folks are more able to pass than others. And then that provides a sense of safety in where do you live. So I do like to talk about that when talking about like support too. And I love the idea of buying the rainbow cake when someone comes out, but it could just be as much as like your friend is posting an IG story and they're at Pride, you do the little heart on it. Like that's how simple like support can be. It doesn't have to be necessarily great acts of bravery. And I think on the other end too, I think allyship is so much stronger than it used to be. I think I'm still processing. We keep going back to Sunday, but Sunday was just like, it was trippy. And I'll say Sam and Supriya, who also works at IW, as I was leaving and I was getting to a point where I just couldn't take it. And they were just there with their umbrellas and the rainbow gate, just standing there, and just to see that quiet activism of just not even doing anything was so much. And I think even small acknowledgements, happy Pride or anything. And I think what's interesting is just saying small comments. I'll speak to one thing where I think there was a missed opportunity. And I would say this: when things happen within the community, like let's take, for example, the Silver Spring flag burnings. And I think much like when any community is targeted, whether it be the Black community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, or the AAPI community, we're seeing so many acts of violence against all of these different communities. And I think even if you're not a community member, I think this transcends all things of folks who are being marginalized and oppressed, is just saying, I see you. I remember my last workplace, the Pulse Club shootings happened, where 50 LGBTQ members were gunned down in a club, and it was particularly Latino night. I identify as Latina. I very much go to Latino nights as part of Pride at clubs in the community. And I was like, oh my God, that could have been me. And I remember going to work and just feeling like it was so quiet. Like everyone knew. And I remember rocking my like rainbow Pride that day. All I wanted someone just to say is like, hey, Lauren, how you doing? Like, I see you. I'm sorry. And I think being an ally to all communities when there is such a very public act of aggression against a community, just saying, I see you. I care about you. How are you? Even just that just makes you feel seen. So I think it's so basic. It's so simple. How can I show up for you? How can I support you? How can I make you feel seen? Is all. So yeah, I will end it there.
For comments, say thank you all so much for being willing to come on and to speak your truth. Amazing. You're amazing individuals. And I just want to let you know, I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And if you don't, let me see if there's another comment. Let me see, somebody said something. Oh, Thank you all for great answers. Yes. Thanks, Mike. Yes. I don't think this is the end of the conversation. I think that we're going to have more conversations, and there's going to be more trainings. And Lauren, thank you so much for agreeing to come back and teach the RISE class. I'm going to hold you to it. People need to know, and the fact is, if you treat people with dignity and respect, and you treat people the way you want to be treated, we wouldn't have had to have these conversations, because that means that we all treat each other with the inclusivity, but also with the love that we're supposed to have for each other anyway. The Bible does say, love one another. That's everybody. And so I want to thank the team for supporting you guys on Sunday and being that protective shield. But also thank you all, the team, and as well as Rabbi Kobe, for coming on and speaking your truth and being honest. It's needed. Not the last of the conversations. We'll just have to schedule some more time. And so Miranda and Alex and Rabbi Kobe and Lauren, I will call you again. But if there are not any more comments, we will end this. Thank you so much. This is going to be recorded and it's going to be sent out. I think it needs to be. Thank you so much, Alex, for all of your help. Thank you, Sam, for doing everything. And happy Pride for everyone, as Lauren just said. Happy Pride for everybody. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
You did it. Hi. I always stay on in case the people want to talk.
It was a good conversation. That was
Mm.
really, really good.
Yes.
Really glad. You can stop the recording now.
Yes, good call.